This is Dave with Taboo Customs. This video today we're going to be covering something a little bit different. We aren't going to be working on a Jeep, we're going to be working on our 2003 Ford F350 6-liter diesel. Now what's happened with this truck is we have a leak at the small fuel filter that's up on top of the engine. We've gone through all of the 6-liter problems with this truck in the 8 years that we've owned it. FICM, the high pressure oil pump, the injectors, and then most recently was the O-ring underneath the high pressure oil pump we had to replace. So in replacing that, it looks like we probably caused a leak somewhere or just developed a leak on its own. And we noticed that because we could start to smell of diesel, obviously, and then we started to see some puddles. And in looking at it, we have an active drip at that fuel filter, and we'll try to show you that here in a second, what that actually looks like, and then we'll talk about how we're going to go about trying to fix it. Alright, so from the video you can see that it was a pretty active leak, something we definitely need to get fixed without driving the truck too much. So to start out, we aren't sure yet exactly how we're going to go about this. We have purchased a new pressure regulator kit, new spring, gaskets, everything, because where that's leaking is actually here at the pressure regulator. There's a cover there. So we're assuming that that gasket is leaking there, or one of the O-rings. Earlier on, when we did find this problem, we did try to tighten this up just to see if something came loose. We had checked this back connection here. Actually replaced the O-ring in that, thinking, hoping that maybe that was just it, something pretty simple, but unfortunately it didn't fix it. So we're gonna have to pull it in and start to tear it apart. I haven't decided if we're going to pull this whole housing off. If I remember correctly, I believe the fuel filter housing and the oil filter housing here are the same housing, so I might try to just leave it on there so that way it won't make too much of a mess. But the issue I have is that this radiator hose here is kind of in the way of that regulator cover, so we'll have to see and decide. I mean, I don't really want to pull the hose off, get coolant everywhere either, but might be the lesser of two evils. We'll start out, see where we go. First, we're going to pull the air filter, probably the hose. We're going to pull the intercooler hose here, and we'll go from there. Alright, so we've got the intercooler hose off, we've got the air filter out. We didn't need to take this hose off back here, there's plenty of room. One thing, that intercooler hose there, it does come out. I mean, you have to kind of twist and snake it out. Really only will come out one way and go back in one way. I've done it a bunch of times, so it's pretty pretty easy for me. Getting a filter out was actually a little bit of a pain in the butt, as you probably saw. So so here we are. This is the housing that I was talking about with the regulator. What I did was I took a mirror, and I was mainly been looking up under the housing, and I cleaned the housing off as best I could. Took a light, shined it down there. What I wanted to make sure was that I didn't crack this housing on the bottom. It's really from looking at it earlier, the only place it can be leaking is either from a crack on the bottom or probably from this the ring, that's the O-ring that's actually underneath this. So pretty certain we're probably leaking from that O-ring. So we're gonna go ahead and pull this off, and we'll also take a look at the kit that we purchased to rebuild the regulator here. Alright, so this is the rebuild kit that we've got, and I can't remember actually exactly where we got it from, but there's a lot of them out there available, and they're not real expensive. I want to say it was like 35 bucks. and it really, gets you everything you need. This obviously is the main ring that, chances are it's probably the what's leaking. So we pull it off. We'll take a look at that. You get the housing too, which is kind of really surprising, but you get the whole housing. So I don't know if that means that these have a problem with warping or breaking or what that is. But you obviously get a new spring, because from what I understand, the springs in the regulators do get weak, but that's not the reason we're doing this. We're doing it mainly because of the leakage. And then a new plunger, some new bolts, and a couple of new bushings. Okay, so to start taking this apart, we've disconnected the sensor that's down here in the front. Looks like it's a coolant sensor, just below where the hose here goes into the into the intake. What we've done with this hose is we took a ratchet strap and we hooked one end to the front here, went around the hose and hooked the other end to the back of the engine compartment, and we just used that to pull the hose over. Definitely don't want to pull it over so much that you damage the hose. These hoses are in pretty decent shape, so I'm not too worried, but if you do that, you should be able to get to this bottom right bolt here. These are Torx bolts, so we're going to have to go find our Torx bit here in a minute. The only other thing other than these four bolts we're going to have to do is we have to take off this fuel line here, which just make sure you don't round the nut off. Make sure you go get the right wrench for this. Especially if you have line wrenches, that would help. I don't know if I have a line wrench actually that size, but you definitely want to be careful that you don't round that one off. Okay, so as far as tools you'll need, this line back here looks to be 21 millimeter. Could be, I guess, 13/16 too, but it's kind of an odd size, and honestly I don't have a 13/16 end wrench, but 21 millimeter does fit on it well. This here appears to be 22 millimeters, so just slightly bigger on this this fitting that is in between the actual line and the housing. Now for the Torx bits here, these are 25 millimeter, and when you're checking to see what size Torx bits you need, a lot of times it's easier to use the new bolts to find your Torx bit, because often these bolts here, especially the ones at the bottom, are pretty filled up with gunk. So first thing we'll do is we'll take the line off. And you do want to make sure that, hopefully the line itself comes off and not that fitting. Now we will need that fitting whenever we reinstall the new housing, but I think we're going to take that fitting off in a vise instead of trying to take it off here, because it looks like it'd be pretty hard to get a wrench around there. We're going to start with the bottom bolt. You might want to have a rag on hand because you are going to leak some fuel. Alright, so as you take the cover off there, make sure you support it, because this is pretty well spring loaded here. I mean, that's as far as this spring goes in, and here's the spring, and you can see how nasty this is actually. So there's probably a chance it was leaking out of here. Here's the main O-ring that goes around the housing. I don't see nothing or anything major wrong with it. Kind of nice whenever you can easily see what's up. Here's a little white piece you'll replace as well. I'll have to dig that out of there. There's the seat in here for the plunger as well that we'll have to pull out and we'll have to replace. Alright, so we've got our pick. Go up under this little white plastic piece here. Now Thing to watch out for, I just noticed as I pulled this off, there's actually an O-ring on the end of that didn't come with it. So we need to go in and pull that out as well. On the bottom, grab this seat here. Pull it out. There's also an O-ring on the back side of it. It's usually sitting down on top of it. It came loose there. Okay, get it lined back up. Gosh dang it. Anyway, yeah, it sits on there like that. Alright, so we've got our kit here, and we're starting to compare parts. Obviously, here's what we brought out of the, excuse me, no. Actually, this is the one that came out of the truck. And the first thing we noticed was that on this one, you know, we've got this extra little ring down here. But this ring is really flat. You know, it's hard to tell if that was actually an O-ring at one time, because there's nothing in the kit that really exactly looks like this. I mean, you get a O-ring that does fit over this, but in our trying to put it back in the truck, it doesn't fit real well. So we'll keep taking a look at that. If anything, I may end up reusing this little ring down here. For now, I'm going to set those off to the side so I don't get them mixed up again. This is the fitting that goes between the fuel line and the regulator. It does have a couple of O-rings on it that we're going to replace, and that's what this brown O-ring is for here. And we've got a green O-ring that goes on this side. Now, one thing we also noticed in messing around was when we pull this O-ring out, this O-ring is really tight up against the outside. If you notice, you can see how there's a space on the inside, but there's no space on the outside. So we pulled this out earlier, and it takes a little bit of finagling to get it back in there. So be really careful with that. And I think we might wait till we get this back on the truck. I mean, we'll pull this old O-ring out, we'll get it back on the truck, and then we'll try to work this new O-ring in, because I'm just afraid that this O-ring can pop back out of there pretty easily. So now we are going to go ahead and install the housing before we reinstall this, because I don't really want to put this housing in a vise to tighten it down and try to install it, because we don't want to end up cracking or breaking it. One thing I should have mentioned, this is an actual upgrade kit, and it's called the blue spring kit, which is pretty common. Increases the fuel pressure on the Fords, but that's not really why I was installing it. Really installing it because we were pretty certain that this gasket here, this old one, had dried out and leaked, so we'll be replacing with this new nice one. Okay, so we've got our bottom O-ring and this seat back in place, and we didn't show that on the video because honestly it took us a good 5-10 minutes of messing around with before we got it in there. What we ended up doing was, you know, lubricating that O-ring pretty good, then using the plunger to help us to be able to work that in. And we did get it seated down, and when you get it seated down, this seat will sit, you know, proud to that face, just a hair, a 32nd to a 16th. So we went ahead and we left the plunger in there. Definitely make sure you have like a rag or something in case you drop your parts. We did clean off the face as well a little bit. So the next thing is this little piece with the small O-ring at the top, and that'll go in that top there. Also make sure put a little bit of fuel on that O-ring. Get it square and seated in there right. So once it's in there, it's going to stay. We can take our new spring, put it in our plunger. Then we can take our new main gasket for the housing, our new bolts, our new housing, Again, make sure you put a little bit of fuel on it, just to, any of the rubber pieces, just to make sure that you don't tear them up when you're installing them, especially O-rings. But this one's not as critical, but I would go ahead and lubricate it anyway. Make sure you get it in there lined up correctly. The spring will sit down in a hole inside the housing, and the spring is pretty tough, so there's some bosses in here to help line it up. And the easiest one to put in is going to be this bottom left hand bolt first. That way you can kind of take some of the, that's where the spring pressure is going to be. Get that one started. Try to screw it as far in as we can. And then we're going to do the upper right to keep it from wanting to pop back out. Alright, so you may have noticed that I pulled these out, put them back in again. The reason for that is I, in my haste, forgot to put any kind of Loctite on them. And in looking for torque specs on these, they're really, as far as I could find, any torque specs. So I put a little bit of blue Loctite on them and basically snugged them down. I mean, this is an aluminum housing, and so you definitely don't want to tighten them too tight or you're going to strip them out. Now here I did find in looking for the torque specs that these are actually standard sizes. So this is a 13/16 and this is the corresponding probably 7/8 here, just a 16th bigger than 13/16. So now that we've got this all installed, we'll have to put the rest of it back together, put our tube back in, put our air filter back in, and then we'll check it and see if our leak has gone away. Alright, so there you have it. Video of it running. Not leaking now, so that's great. That new ring around the housing took care of that issue. We also upgraded the fuel regulator, so that's a good thing too. One thing to remember is to remember to hook up that coolant sensor again, because honestly I forgot until I started it up. I started in the video and realized it wasn't hooked up. If you don't hook it up, your check gauge's light will come on. You won't have a temperature. So just make sure you hook that up. Obviously, like getting the air filter back in apparently is the biggest pain in the butt about the whole deal. But anyway, thanks for watching. If you have any questions or comments, you can get a hold of us on our website, taboocustoms.com, or on Facebook. And as always, like or subscribe is appreciated. Thanks.